Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
Welcome to your Daily Detroit for Monday, July 22nd, 2019. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jer Stays. I'm stuck in moving day as we get ready to relocate Daily Detroit's home studio from the University District to the North End.
I'm going to miss that big old house, Jer.
Yeah, me too. We'll talk about it more for our Patreon members later this week. And this is a little reminder to become a member at patreon.com/dailydetroit. But I digress. Today's show is a two-fer. First, we speak with Randy Essex of the Detroit Free Press. He tells us all about the paper's investigation into how Ford Motor Company tried to hide defective transmissions in older models of the Focus and Fiesta small cars. The problems have led to many injuries and lawsuits.
Then I catch up with soccer correspondent Fletcher Sharpe after Detroit City FC crashed out of the NPSL playoffs Sunday against Cleveland. Ford Motor Company knowingly introduced its low-priced Focus and Fiesta small cars several years ago with defective transmissions. It continued to sell them for years despite thousands of complaints from customers and mounting repair bills. That's the gist of an investigative piece that appeared recently in the Detroit Free Press. And joining me on the line to talk about that piece is Randy Essex. He's Senior Content Director, and he oversees auto coverage for the Freep. Randy, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks.
All right, first of all, what is the specific technology at issue here, and what model years of the Ford Focus and Fiesta are affected by it?
To the driver, it operates like an automatic. In theory, you put it in drive and it goes forward, you put it in reverse and it goes backward, you put it in park and so forth. And it shifts itself even though it works like a manual, thus the dual clutch. The reason for that was to improve fuel economy for the most part. Ford needed, at the time, if you recall, that period of time, 2007, 2008, when these cars were in development, CAFE standards were going up and gas prices were high. People were turning away from buying big SUVs.
What model years of the Focus and Fiesta are we talking about?
So this transmission was introduced in the 2011 Fiesta, which went on the market in March of 2010, and the 2012 Focus, which went on the market a year after that. The Focus was discontinued after the 2018 model year, and the 2019 Fiesta is the last one.
And so what's the problem with these transmissions?
Part of it, and what Ford said as they came out, is that they feel different than a usual automatic transmission, and drivers who expect them to be like an automatic might be surprised by the way they shift, because there are clutches inside the transmission that are working for you. That's their normal operation, but owners right away reported that they jerked. There were complaints to National Highway Traffic Safety Administration quite early on of incidents in effect of the cars going into neutral, people pushing the accelerator and getting high RPMs but not getting acceleration.
So it just goes out of gear.
Some incidents of the cars actually going forward when the gear shift showed reverse and vice versa.
Wow.
Over a period of time. And then just a lot of shaking, shudder. I mean, I've talked to people who haven't had some of the more serious problems with the cars who say they were embarrassed to have passengers in their car.
And there were no known deaths as a result of this, but several injuries, I understand, right?
So we analyzed the Consumer Reports complaints to NHTSA and found at least 4,300 complaints that can be specifically linked to the transmissions in these cars, and those consumers reported 50 injuries in those complaints to the federal government.
Yet NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, never issued a recall in this case. Is that right?
Ford and NHTSA looked at this in 2014. Part of what Ford did as a result of that was added what they called an overt warning to the dash, a software type update, because Ford told NHTSA that there were things that happened to the car before it would go into neutral this idea of it going into neutral is probably the highest of these concerns because, people can't accelerate on the freeway. They reported being rear-ended. They reported nearly being rear-ended. They can't accelerate at times going on to freeways and so forth. And Ford said, well, there are things that happen inside the car, and we will add an overt warning to tell the driver that that's happening and that the transmission's about to fail. We found a document seeking Mark Fields, who was CEO at the time, approval to add that, and it noted that this will better satisfy NHTSA's concerns. So as NHTSA has done many times in the past, it looked at this and decided not to open an investigation.
So to what degree has Ford acknowledged this problem over time, publicly to the public?
So they have acknowledged the shuttering. They don't describe it the way owners describe it. One of the things that we found was that in 2011, there was a decision within Ford to stop using this transmission and to switch to a 9-speed automatic, but that was not done. That's in the documents. Ford acknowledged to us that it had discussions about switching transmissions. It decided not to. That would have been very expensive. They would have had to retool a plant. It would have delayed subsequent model years. It would have hurt fuel economy. But they didn't have a fix for it at the time. There are, and when they say they didn't have a fix, they're acknowledging the shaking and shuddering that's, far above normal and far above customer expectations. And it took several years for them to have confidence that they had solved that. The flipping into neutral, they say didn't emerge until 2014. There's a lot of documentation that as early as 2008, their lawyers and engineers were aware that this was an issue, a potential issue. There are emails talking about lowering the unintended neutral events to a broadly acceptable level. Ford has always contended that because the brakes, the power steering, the restraints, and the other safety systems in the car work, that the car going into neutral is not a critical safety issue because people can turn on their blinker and pull over to the side.
Wow.
In their presentation to NHTSA in 2014, there is a passage where a returned transmission module from a customer was put into a Ford fleet vehicle, and the engineers took it out for a drive, and it went into neutral 7 times in what appears to have been a 20 or so mile drive. It went into neutral on an on-ramp. It went into neutral in a parking lot. It went into neutral on a highway.
So this problem originated under CEO Alan Mulally, the former Ford CEO, who was sort of famous, for his focus on quality and really being deliberate, not rushing things to market, not papering over problems. So given all that, how did this happen? That this, because you document, so many people inside the company, raising red flags, and yet, the transmission still goes to market and continues there for years.
Well, there's one of the documents is a 2012 DCFC lessons learned update.
That's the name of the transition, right?
Yeah. And it talks about in development for the Fiesta, late decisions that caused, I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but late decisions about various aspects of the transmission that caused the rest of the process to be rushed. There are references to at the early checkpoints for implementation-ready materials, hardware and software, it was clear that the transmission could not meet customer expectations. I'm quoting a document from memory, but that's certainly the gist of it. It says that problems increased rather than decreased as it headed toward launch. This is the same document, by the way, where it says that Ford had made a decision to switch to a different kind of transmission, but that later didn't happen. At the time, Raj Nair was one of the lead authors of that document. He, as you know, later became head of Ford North America. It would be speculation to say exactly what happened and who knew and who made these decisions. We know that the auto companies were under tremendous pressure at that time. Ford had its line of credit and it was going to avoid bankruptcy, but it needed these cars. It needed the cars for gas mileage. Mullally had told lenders that they would put out better small cars. These were the first global vehicles under Mullally.
Yeah, still no real fix, and a lot of these cars with defective transmissions still out on the roads, right?
Ford believes that, it changed clutch material. We know that. There was a defective seal at some point. Ford believes that it has fixes for these vehicles, and it believes that the transmissions that it put in the later models are good. Some owners we've talked to would dispute that. One thing that has happened with these owners is they took vehicles to dealerships multiple times. Sometimes they were told they just didn't understand how the car worked. Sometimes they were told that there was a fix and they drove the car for a little bit and it wasn't fixed. There is internal email from dealership techs to Ford really questioning those early fixes, not current. The newer models are better. I don't think there's any question about that. There are about 1.5 million of the through model year 2016 cars registered in the United States now. A lot of those owners have given up. There's a Ford document, a Ford update in 2016 that says 350,000 of these cars have been repaired 3 or more times. That also estimates that total quality cost through 2020 is going to be $3 billion for Ford.
All right, Randy Essex is Senior Content Director for the Detroit Free Press. He worked on these stories. Randy, thanks so much for talking to us on Daily Detroit.
You're welcome.
Detroit City FC saw its playoff hopes dashed and its 2019 regular season come to an end Sunday, losing 3-2 in penalty kicks to Cleveland SC. The two teams finished the 90 minutes tied at 2 goals apiece and had 2 scoreless extra time periods before going to the penalty shootout. Joining us to talk about that is Fletcher Sharpe, our intrepid soccer correspondent. Fletcher, City vanquished Minneapolis City SC in the Midwest semifinals Friday night, 2-0. They looked pretty convincing doing it, and they took a 2-0 lead into halftime against Cleveland yesterday. So what happened?
I'm not really sure, to be quite honest. It looked like they were having a hard time breaking down Cleveland's game plan, which is essentially kick it up to their really tall forward, Vinny Bell, and then let him either control it or flick it to someone on the wings. And by the time they kind of started getting a way to figure it out, they got tired as well. Also, Cleveland semifinal, they got down 3-1 to Rochester Lancers and scored 2 goals in the last 8 minutes or so to tie it up. And
yeah, that was a crazy game.
6-4.
Yeah.
So they're no strangers to getting down and coming back.
Yeah. What's the mood like, among the City faithful from this loss?
It's kind of split. You have the fans who are like, yeah, well, it stinks to lose, but, Founders Cup is coming up, so we'll focus on that. Then you have some of the fans who are a bit more critical, who are like, we should have beat that team. We made mistakes here, and here. So I guess it's kind of like most fan bases where it's just kind of, you have the people who are a little bit too in, you have the people who are a little bit too out, sort of.
So as you mentioned, the soccer action isn't over for Detroit City FC this year. They play their next game as an annual friendly against Windsor TFC August 6th. And then they start the Founders Cup season, the inaugural season, August 10th at Miami FC down in the heat of South Florida. Fletcher, what happens between now and then? Because they're going to lose a lot of their roster who, going back to college and everything, right?
Yeah, they're going to lose a few players who are going back to college. That's why if people were paying attention to the Twitter feed, when they announced player signings, they would announce this player joined for the regular season, this player joined us for the Founders Cup, this player joined us for the entire season. So you'll harken back to some players who you might have seen start to play late in the season, like Tendai Jadira, who probably joined for the Founders Cup as he's out of college eligibility. But players like Jalen Chrysler, Musa Guille, players like that, Will Perkins, a lot of their defensive players and maybe even their goalie, Hunter Morris, have college eligibility left, so they are required to go back to their schools. But yeah, you're going to see a lot more names who have had professional experience. Might even see a few names you might have recognized once or twice. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see who comes out against Miami.
So a lot of signings we should be expecting to see in the next few weeks.
Yes and no. Some of these people they signed early on, and those people just knew they would not come until later in the year. Some people they might be signing now, but it's probably a bit more towards the former. They would have their signings kind of taken care of, and they're maybe just getting a few more people for injuries.
All right. Well, Fletcher, we will catch up with you to preview the Founders Cup season in a couple weeks. In the meantime, enjoy your time off.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to do that.
Thanks a lot, Fletcher.
That'll do it for today's episode, friends. If you like what you're hearing, tell a friend about Daily Detroit, and make sure to subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It's a great way to spread the word and make sure more people find out that, well, Sven, we're magic. I'm Jer Stays.
Yeah, Jer's got some great magic tricks. Ask him sometime. I'm Sven Gustafson. Want to give a quick shout out to El Patillon. That's the taco truck down in Southwest Detroit. They fed my family last night for $20, and it was delicious. Thanks so much for listening. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.